This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Good evening, everyone. It's truly an honor to be here tonight. For me personally, Young Israel of Kew Garden Hills is my old stomping ground. Actually, I had the privilege and continue to have the privilege to have been teaching here since 2010, 2011, when Rabbi Fabian Schoenfeld Zechatzak Levracha hired me to give the shiur, the retiree shiur. At the time, in the heyday of the shiur, we had about 20, 25 individuals a number of times a week. And that shiur continued for over a decade, and have many dear and close friends, associates that I've been learning with ever since. So with the permission of your esteemed Rav and Rebbitzin, I would like to share with you this evening a subject that is very dear to my heart. Tonight I am here to pay tribute really to the heroes of the Jewish people. People who stand ready day and night to preserve the dignity of the living and the dead. And the reason why this subject is very dear to my heart is my own grandfather, Zechatzak Levracha. I was speaking with the Rav about him a few moments ago, who passed away somewhat recently at 106 years old. He was a Holocaust survivor. He was from Warsaw. He was one of the primary disciples of Rabbi Nachum Zemba. Rabbi Nachum Zemba was one of the leading Torah minds in pre-war Poland. My grandfather used to study with him. And my grandfather was energetic and sprightly, even in his oldest years, well over 90. My grandfather would say, the hardest part of turning 90 is reading the Rashi letters in the Gemara. That's the hardest part of turning 90. If anybody never saw my grandfather get called up for an aliyah at 96, 97, 98 years old, where he would rise with spiritual might and make a bracha on the Torah, one never saw real Gevuras HaTorah. And we always used to ask my grandfather the following question, and my grandfather had selected hearing. And for somehow, this question never registered. We would say, Zaidi, Bama harachta yamim. Why did you merit to live so long? And somehow that question, he never heard that question. And in one of the last Purims of his life, actually my grandfather's name was Mordechai, his bris milah was on Ta'anis Esther, and we always viewed him like Mordechai HaTzadik, one of the great heroes of the Jewish people. And my grandmother herself was a survivor, and we didn't quite know their birthday, so we always celebrated their birthday on Purim. He never heard this question. He didn't want to deal with this question. Bama harachta yamim. And then finally it came, one of the last Purims of his life, and I had the courage, I mustered up the guts, I said, Zaidi, it was at a time when he was besimcha, he was in a very joyous mood, said, Zaidi, Bama harachta yamim. What was your merit to live so long? And he was ready to answer the question. He said, Meis mitzvah. I said, what? Meis mitzvah? Zaidi, what did you mean by Meis mitzvah? My grandfather was a Rav, sorry New Yorkers, in the city of Champions in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He was a rabbi for over 70 years. That's a very long time to be a rabbi, let me tell you. And we thought what he meant was, not only was he the rabbi in Pittsburgh, he was also the chief chaplain of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So anytime a Jew would die in Pennsylvania, not only in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, in Virginia, in Kentucky, and this Jew did not have arrangements, if this Jew did not have a plan, did not have a kever, this would always fall in my grandfather's lap, and my grandfather made it his holy obligation to make sure that every single Jew in that area was given a dignified Jewish burial, that he had a minyan to be at his burial. My grandfather would go to the kollel, round up 10 boys, bring them to the cemetery to be able to say Kaddish for this individual. So he said, Zaidi, was it because you made sure that every Jew in Pennsylvania and Ohio and Kentucky and Virginia was given Jewish burial? And my grandfather said, no, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about 1942, 1943, 1944, 1945, when there were bodies strewn in the camps. Nobody would go near them. They were infested with typhus. Just to be in their vicinity, you were risking your life. And my grandfather said, with abandon, he would go from body to body, and with his own hands, he would dig holes in the ground. Sometimes he would have help, other times not. And with abandon, he risked his life to give people the dignity of a Jewish burial. In my opinion, my grandfather said, maybe that's why I lived long. And I was very moved by this story because shortly after, I had the privilege to be at a shiur of Rabbi Asher Weiss, one of the leading poskim today, who was speaking about his own father's passing. And his father was asked, why do you think you merited to have a son like Rabbi Asher Weiss? He has another brother who's one of the leading poskim in Montreal. And Rav Asher Weiss's father said that after the war, in 1945, together with the Kloisenberger Rebbe, they would go from body to body, from one typhus-ridden body to the next. And they would make sure that every Jew was given a dignified, respectable Jewish burial. So for all of the dedicated men and women who are part of this Chevra, who dedicate their time and their services to ensure the kavod achrein of the Mesim, you have to understand this is not a small thing. This is the most important task in the whole world. I want to share with you from my grandfather's personal memoirs. My grandfather wrote about some of his experiences in the Warsaw Ghetto. He writes about a rabbi. This rabbi's name is pretty much forgotten. But this was a historic figure, the chief rabbi in Warsaw, Rabbi Yitzchak Zev Kanal, the senior Rav in Warsaw. Most people never heard of him. You know, David HaMelech says in Tehillim, Al zois yispalel kol chassid eilecha le'es mitzay. For this, every pious person should pray for a time of need. It's an incredible pasuk. King David is saying that even though in life you need to pray for everything. I remember when I was a bacher, I grew up in Flatbush. You know, Flatbush is in the country of Brooklyn. It's one of the states in the country of Brooklyn. I was just in London, so in London I say I come from the continent of New York and the country of Brooklyn. I grew up in Flatbush on M and 31st. So as a bacher, I had the good sense. I used to walk from M and 31st to R and Ocean Parkway. I used to walk to the shul of Harav Avigdor Miller, Zecher Tzaddik Levracha. It was about a 50-minute walk. And I remember Rav Miller would say, you know, in life, you have to pray for everything. There's nothing in this world that comes without prayer. Even the world to come. Even the world to come, we pray. Harachamanu yizakenu limois hamashiach ulechaye ha'olam haba. There's nothing in this world that comes without prayer. But even so, David HaMelech says, Al zois yispalel kol chassid eilecha le'es mitzay. Pray for this. Meaning, of everything in this world, the following is the most important thing to pray for. And the Gemara brings various opinions. Doesn't mean to pray for a spouse. Doesn't mean to pray for a livelihood. And the Gemara brings an opinion to pray for Jewish burial. And Rabbi Yitzchak Kanal, senior Rav of Warsaw, was in a very terrible predicament. He knew if he would be sent to the crematoria, he would never merit Jewish burial. So he made a very daring move. He darted at the Nazi to try to kill the Nazi. Obviously an exercise in futility because he was giving up his own life. But he knew that he would be shot and then he would be given Jewish burial. So in order to avoid going to the crematoria, he darted at the Nazi to merit Kavuras Yisrael. That's the significance of Jewish burial. That was his halachic decision. You know, it's very interesting. We're going to read in the Megillah Saturday night that Haman tried to accomplish 4 things. Lahashmid, laharoig, uliabed, ushlalam lavais. What are these 4 terrible plots of Haman? Says the Vilna Gaon, lahashmid, he wanted to kill us. Laharoig, he wanted us to lose our soul, that we can't fulfill Torah mitzvahs anymore. But what does it mean, la'abed? What more did he want from us? What more did that wicked Haman want than to kill us and take away our soul? Says the Vilna Gaon, la'abed. He wanted to desecrate the Jewish body. La'abed. He wanted to take away from the Jew what every Jew hopes for. Kvuras Yisrael. You know, it's amazing, in recent times, we read about another Haman who had the same diabolical plot. It wasn't enough to kill the Jew. It wasn't enough to take away Torah mitzvahs. He wanted to ensure that a Jew would not be given Kvuras Yisrael, to put the Jew in the crematoria. La'abed. Why did Hitler want la'abed? And this is a fundamental lesson. Unfortunately, a Jew today doesn't even have the understanding of our role in the world that Hitler had. If you want to understand the mission statement of a Jew, what a Jew represents in this world, what our mission in this world is, you need to be familiar with a good chunk of a terrible book called Mein Kampf. Because Hitler understood the role of a Jew in history in a way more than we understand it. You know, Hitler wrote in Mein Kampf that the Jew attempted to inflict on society 2 defects. A defect of the body and a defect of the personality. The defect of the body was circumcision. The defect of the personality was conscience. For Hitler, it wasn't enough to kill the Jew. Because as long as the Jewish body is extant, the body of the Jew represents to the world morality, dignity, that man was created in the image of God. So for Hitler, it wasn't enough lahashmid, it wasn't enough laroig, he wanted la'abed. To desecrate the Jewish body, to defile the bris milah. Hitler said we Germans were barbarians. And as soon as we eradicate the Jewish people, we will revert back to being the barbarians that we are. You know, I always wondered, we say on Purim, La Yehudim Haisa Oira, V'Simcha, V'Sasoin, Vikar, Oira is Torah, Simcha is Yamtif, Vikar is what? Bris milah. Why is Purim a celebration of Bris milah? Haman wasn't trying to abolish bris milah. Yeah, he was. Haman was following the same plot as Hitler. His goal was la'abed, to desecrate the Jewish body, because the body of the Jew represents morality to the world, represents ethics to the world, that man is not a barbarian. You know, I always wondered about this. There's this, catchphrase that we like to say, but I don't think we exactly know what it means. You know, you always hear this phrase, the Jewish people are God's ambassadors in the world. Our mission in this world is to be a light unto the nations. You ever hear that expression? Our job is to be or lagoyim. What exactly does that mean? How are we supposed to be a light unto the nations? I read an article that Rav Hershel Schachter wrote that he heard from Rav Soloveitchik, that the definition and the mission statement of the Jew to be a light unto the nations means that our role in the world is to teach all the nations of the world that man was created in the image of Hashem, that we are the handiwork of God. That's what it means to be a light unto the nation. And how do we teach the world the dignity of man? How do we teach the world that we're created in the image of Hashem? How do we go about doing that? by teaching the world the dignity of the living and the dignity of the dead, by preserving the kavod achrein of every Jew, by ensuring that every Jew is given kavuras Yisrael, that every Jew who would like to be buried in a Jewish cemetery is given a kever, and he's given tahara, and his family mourns for him. That is the most important task that a Jew has in this world. As ambassadors of God, it is our most sacred task to ensure kavuras Yisrael. So there's a man. He has to be in Albany. Problem is, back in the day they had Holiday Inn, Hampton Inn. There were no Holiday Inns. There were no Hampton Inns. He needed a place to spend the night. So he calls up his friend. His friend says, look, I have a great idea. There are no motels in Albany, but I have a friend who has a nursing home in Albany. Why don't you call him up? Maybe he has an extra bed. You say, you out of your mind? I'm going to sleep in a nursing home? Why would I sleep in a nursing home? I mean, that's creepy. He said, well, it's better than sleeping in your car. Why don't you give it a shot? So he calls up the nursing home owner. He says, are you out of your mind? I'm not a hotel. There's not a Hilton. I'm a nursing home. But he says, actually, somebody just died 10 minutes ago. You could take his bed for the night. It's available. I mean, we don't have new linen. We don't have fresh linen. But if you don't mind sleeping in a dead guy's bed, not a problem. So the guy was a little, creeped out by that. He said, I'll let you know. But all of a sudden it started pouring, and he couldn't stay in his car. So a few minutes later, he finds himself in a nursing home in Albany, in the bed of a man who had died 10 minutes earlier. Finally, he falls asleep. I'm sure he had very pleasant dreams. And all of a sudden, he sees the nursing home owner coming in. He's rattling around the papers. He's trying to collect the belongings. He said, what's going on? Am I alive? Am I dead? Where am I? He said, no, don't worry. I'm just trying to take care of this man's belongings. He says, by the way, in whose bed am I? And then he looks on the door. And on the door was the name David Schwartz. Said, what is a Jewish man doing in this nursing home? The nursing home owner said, actually, I don't know. He ended up over here. So this guy says, well, where is David Schwartz going to be buried? He says, well, there's a cemetery connected to this nursing home. Tomorrow morning, he's going to be buried in the Christian cemetery of this nursing home. So this guy sleeping in the dead man's bed gets on the phone. He calls his friend back in the city. He said, I don't know what to do. I have a mace mitzvah over here. He's going to be buried in a Christian cemetery. What should we do? He said, actually, I heard that the Chevra Kadisha of Washington Heights has 10 extra plots for mace mitzvah. Why don't you call up the head of the Chevra Kadisha of Washington Heights? Maybe he could help out this guy. It's a big mitzvah. So he calls up the head of the Chevra Kadisha Washington Heights. Sure enough, they have a bunch of spots left. By the next day, David Schwartz is getting tahara from the Chevra Kadisha of Washington Heights. The head of the Chevra pulls up the blanket to see who exactly is this individual. And he almost faints. David Schwartz? That David Schwartz? So the guy said, which David Schwartz is this? This is the David Schwartz who was a beggar in Washington Heights for many years. And a few years ago he came to me and he asked me, what is the fate of someone who never made final preparations, who doesn't have a plot, who doesn't have a kever, who doesn't have a chevra, who doesn't have family? What is their fate? And I said, I'm sorry to tell you, the fate of such a person is they won't be given Kfuras Yisrael. There's nothing that anybody could do. He has no family. He has no plot. David Schwartz says, what a terrible fate. David Schwartz then took his life savings that he collected over many years. He gave it to the head of the Chevra of Washington Heights. He purchased 10 spots that in the future, if any mace mitzvah needs a place to be buried, they'll be buried in the Washington Heights Chevra Kadisha Cemetery. And sure enough, who was the first person to be buried in these 10 spots? David Schwartz, the benefactor of these plots. Friends, what goes around comes around. Ultimately, those heroes of the Jewish people who are dedicated to ensuring the kavod achron and the dignity of the Chaim and the Mesim, you are the ones who will ultimately benefit, because whatever chesed we do in this world, whatever good deeds we do in this world, ultimately it is we who are sanctified, it is we who are elevated, it is we who will be the ultimate beneficiary in this world and in Olam Haba and in the world to come. So we pay tribute to the Chevra Kadisha of Kew Garden Hills. I also pay my respects to Harav Fabian Schoenfeld, Zecher Tzag Levracha, who hired me 15 years ago. L'havdo ben Chaim l'Chaim, to Rabbi Yoel Schoenfeld, who had the zechus to work under his auspices for over a decade, and Kol HaKavod to your very esteemed Rav and Rebbitzin, who Be'ezus Hashem are taking the shul to greater heights, L'hagdil Torah L'hadira. Thank you very much for your kind attention. I wish everyone Afrei Lechem Param. Thank you.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.